Hi everyone, it's Siona from Honouring ME Crochet and welcome to this week's Hook and Learn session. I've been asked by Ingrid to give some assistance with easy to make Afghans and how much yarn to use and what hook size to use. So unfortunately you got to see my face for most of this one today. I have a hat on because my hair is so grubby. I'm going to the hairdressers later, so such is life. But anyway, so before I start, the one thing I will say is this is my experience for Afghans or blankets and what has been quick and easy for me. It may be different for you depending on what your favourite stitch size is and the amount or type is, and the amount of yarn you will need may vary based on what size blanket you actually need or want and what design that you go with. So for me, I'm going to give a few examples so you can pick and choose from them based on what I've made and the sizes that they have come to. So the first one would be your traditional granny square. Now, the one I've made in the past was with this Knit Picks yarn. Hopefully, well, I might go backwards for you, so apologies for that. This is one of my favourite yarns in that it is relatively inexpensive. It is wool and acrylic. And it's a worsted weight, which is pretty hard to find here in Australia. So I did buy this from the US. It arrives reasonably quickly. So worsted weight, you'll need a 5.5mm hook. And for the size blanket I made, I'm used to granny stitch for this one. One reason I would recommend that is with a granny, you don't need to know the size ahead of time. If you've already got yarn in your stash and you want to just use it up, you just increase as you go, and so it will end up whatever size you've got for your yarn essentially. So for mine, to get 110cm by 110cm square blanket, I used 9 balls of this yarn, the 5.5mm hook, and so that's holding my hands up isn't really going to help you, but that's good. So this yarn comes with, it's 208 yards, which is about 190 meters in 100 grams. And so that's about 1,800 meters that it used to make the blanket, just to give you an idea. So if you want a bigger blanket, obviously you will need more yarn. And that was using, I think I did 4 colors. So obviously another thing to consider when you're making your blankets is the more times you have to change color, the more yarn you're going to need, because each time you're going to have all the bits that you've got to snip off essentially. So then another suggestion I have is corner to corner. So I do have my daughter's blanket here that I made for her. Now, reason I recommend this, it's all in double crochet like the granny stitch as well, or treble if you're a UK term user. The advantage with this is you can make it any size you want, and when you're at the halfway mark, you know exactly how much yarn you're going to need, and you can decide where the halfway mark is. Now, this one I made as a rectangle, which means I stop decreasing on one side before the other. But for this, I used Sheepy's Colour Crafter, another one that I recommend. It's so nice and soft. It is 100% acrylic. This is a 100-gram ball as well. And for this one, to get this blanket, which is 110 centimeters by 130 long, which I think is quite a reasonable length, I used 6 balls. So I did use less. This yarn does cost a little bit more. And this one uses a 4mm hook. So essentially, it doesn't have its weight on here, but it's equivalent to a DK, which I think is 8-ply, but I don't have my cheat guide in front of me for that one. So this one again was about 1,800 meters for the blanket. So there's 300 meters in one ball of this. So you do get more meterage, but because you're using a smaller hook, you still end up with about the same size blanket overall on meters. Does that make sense? So in other suggestions that I've got, So the granny square and the corner to corner, I've put as my recommendations, mostly because you don't need a pattern for those. You can just work and get to the size based on the stash that you've got or the amount of yarn that you've bought. The corner to corner, you'll have more flexibility to figure that out, because once you're at the halfway mark, you know, so if you use 3 balls to get to halfway, you know you need 3 balls to get to the finish. So it's pretty easy to figure out. I do have, so this is a different blanket I've made with the knit picks. The reason I like this one as well is it becomes quite thick and so nice and warm. So this, even though it's a joined one, can't see it so well, all of the diamonds are made with single crochet. So if single crochet, which is double crochet in UK terms, is another stitch, but of course you're going to have to do a lot more rows to get to the size blanket. One suggestion I have as well, if you want to use less yarn to make the same size, use a stitch that has more chains in it. So you could be doing a V-stitch. It will end up being a little more airy blanket, but you will get more blanket for the yarn, if that makes sense. If you want it more dense and you want it to be quick, then I would also suggest using the moss stitch, which is single crochet and chain. So you alternate, and then on the next row, you're working into the chain space, but you're still alternating 1 chain, 1 single crochet. The only disadvantage to that is if you don't have a pattern up front, is that you are doing guesswork with the yarn as far as how much you need. But if you use this one as a guide, so this one is, what did I have that down as? I believe it's about 105 centimeters by 100, no, this was 85 centimeters wide, so not as wide, but about 110 centimeters long. So you can work your initial chain out to about that size, and then just keep working it up in your single crochet chain one. So the moss stitch does make a beautiful heavy blanket. So that's it. So naturally, if you're using a bigger hook, the blankets will work up quicker, but make sure it matches to your yarn. So worsted weight will give you a denser, thicker blanket. You will need more balls of yarn because you have less length in it. Does that make sense? What else have I got here as notes? I generally would make a blanket in an acrylic or an acrylic blend. So the ones that I suggested today, paint box is another one I've got here as a suggestion. That is a DK weight as well. So you need a 4mm hook. It has about the same yardage, meterage in it. Actually, it's got a little bit less. So there's 276 meters per ball. So you will need a bit more than the Colour Crafter. But again, it's a nice stitch, not quite as soft as this one, which is a favorite. So I hope that gives some guidance as to suggestions for quick and easy blankets to make, especially if you're doing it without a pattern. As long as you know the techniques, you can make it grow. If you do have any more questions or comments, then be sure to reach out to me in my Facebook group for help and ideas, or anywhere on Facebook. Send me an email. I do have my Hooked on Crochet Club coming soon, so be sure to keep your ears and eyes out for that one. So thank you for your time. I hope this helps, Ingrid. I'm happy to answer any other questions in the group if you've got them. Okay, till next week. Bye, everyone.